In the early 1970s, in the Adirondacks, in the state of New York, a man went on an 18-day killing spree, during which time he stabbed multiple people, causing authorities to launch a statewide manhunt that employed hundreds of police, helicopters, roadblocks, and search dogs. Locals began carrying firearms around the clock. The Search Command Center received thousands of calls with reports of his sightings. Authorities told the community to lock their doors, carry a weapon, and be on the lookout for a deranged killer on the loose, for a real-life boogeyman hiding in the woods. Summer 1973. Secretariat won the Triple Crown. Billie Jean King beat Chris Everett at Wimbledon. The grandson of oil tycoon J. Paul Getty is kidnapped. NASA sends astronauts to Skylab. And America was glued to the TV by the Senate Watergate hearings. But after an 18-year-old camper was brutally stabbed in Hamilton County, New York, a 12-day manhunt for Robert Francis Garrow left many in the Adirondacks living in terror. And many carried weapons with them at all times. Doors were locked and bolted. Anyone who even remotely looked like Garrow was reported to the police. In the Adirondack Mountains, close to Wells, New York, on the morning of July 29, 1973, four friends, Phil Domblewski, Carol Ann Malinowski, David Freeman, and Nick Fiorello, were camping. They knew each other from high school. They loved hiking and fishing in the Adirondacks. They set up camp in the woods, south of a town called Speculator. A few miles away, on the two-lane highway, was an orange Volkswagen hatchback. The driver was Robert Garrow. A few miles back, he had stopped at a gas station to pick up some donuts and a cup of coffee. As he drove down the road, he saw two tents pitched close to the pavement. He pulled over, turned off the car, and took a sip of coffee. Then, he reached for his rifle and walked over to the campsite. He walked up to the first tent and he aimed his rifle at David Freeman and Carol Ann Malinowski. They were still in their tent. Then he gathered up all four friends. He pointed his rifle at them, threatened to kill them, and said he was going to steal their gas. They were terrified. They believed him. Then he forced them all into the woods. He said, "I've killed before, and I'll do it again if I have to." Then he tied each one of them to a tree. Domblewski, in particular, tried to fight back. Then Garrow set down his rifle and took a knife out of his pocket and stabbed Domblewski multiple times across the chest. At one point, purposefully plunging the knife deep into his chest, killing him instantly. His friends screamed and cried for help. They screamed and cried for Garrow to stop. He quieted them by calmly saying, "It's all right. I'll be finished in a moment." At the same time, two of the campers managed to loosen their ropes and get away. They ran for help, and Garrow ran into the woods. Domblewski was still tied to the tree. The scene was covered with blood, on the grass, on the trees, and so were Garrow's clothes. But when Garrow ran to the woods, he dropped his knife, which was covered with his fingerprints. The Adirondack Mountains are a mountain range in northeastern New York and stretch over 5,000 square miles. Mount Marcy is the highest point in New York, and one of more than 1,000 summits in the area. Hiking to one of these summits is extremely popular. There are many lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water. There are more than 200 identified lakes, such as Lake Terror of the Clouds, or Lake Placid. There are almost 750 miles of river. Small towns are tucked away in remote forests and valleys. Hunting cabins are scattered throughout. Anyone could easily find themselves lost in the dense and vast wilderness of the Adirondacks. Robert Francis Garrow was born in Dannemora, New York in 1936. His parents were Robert Sr. and Margaret. They were French-Canadian farmers. Robert's siblings said their parents were strict and merciless. They abused them often and would beat them with anything they could find, including a brick. Over the years, Garrow and his alcoholic father had numerous violent fights, which required the intervention of the police. Garrow was sent to a prison labor farm following an especially violent incident when he was just 15 years old. It was around this time that Garrow began to experience the dysfunction of paraphilia. Paraphilia is an uncontrollable or recurrent sexual arousal to unusual items, places, situations, fantasies, behaviors, or people. It can also mean having a sexual interest in something other than a human partner who's given their consent. After being freed from the prison farm, Garrow enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, but a year later, he was court-martialed for robbing a commanding officer. He was incarcerated for 6 months in a Florida military jail. In 1957, Garrow went back to New York, got married, and had a son, but his life did not get any better. He was involved in an abusive relationship with a man he later called a sadist. He was also fired from a number of low-end jobs, including one where he broke into a fast food business. In 1961, Garrow was arrested for sexual assault. After entering a guilty plea, he received a 10 to 20-year sentence. Remarkably, in 1968, Garrow was paroled for being a model inmate. Soon after that, Garrow got a job as a mechanic in Syracuse. For a time, it seemed like he really was going to stay out of trouble. Then, in summer of 1973, Garrow was arrested and charged for the abduction and assault of 2 young girls. A short time later, on July 11th, the day after his scheduled court appearance, he sexually assaulted and killed 16-year-old Alicia Hawk. He buried her body between his house and Syracuse University. Authorities didn't know at the time that Hawk had been killed. But when Garrow was seen close to Syracuse University, his parole officer alerted them. After failing to appear in court, Garrow was charged with sexual assault, unlawful confinement, and other offenses by the county judge. Following the murder of Domblewski, Garrow fled into the woods, close to the town of Wells. On the evening of July 31st, he drove his orange Volkswagen hatchback on remote dirt roads across Adirondack Park until finally police spotted him and gave chase. The Volkswagen tore into the dense forest at breakneck speed, chopping down bushes and trees in its path. Eventually, Garrow's car wrecked in a place called Coon Creek. State police were pursuing him as he fled into the woods after jumping out of his car. He was able to escape the 2 troopers who were stuck in the dense undergrowth in a matter of minutes. He slowed down and simply walked. Garrow knew how to survive in the wild and felt at ease in the woods because he had grown up in a similar environment. As the sun set, he realized the police would be out in full force. He simply kept walking through the park in order to find a car he could use to escape. In the meantime, local police, numerous helicopters, hundreds of New York State troopers, and bloodhound search dogs were brought in. Massive searchlights were turned on at the border of the forest, and a command post was set up close to the Wells campground. The police picked up Garrow's wife and child from Albany and brought them to the command center. The search went on all day and night. As officers searched the forest with scent hounds and flashlights, Domblewski's friends used pictures to identify Garrow. Garrow was also linked to the abandoned Volkswagen, and the Wells Town Court issued an arrest order for him the next day, accusing him of murder. Garrow's potential involvement in the death of another Adirondack camper a few weeks prior began to raise suspicions. Similar to this attack, the body of Daniel Porter, a 23-year-old Harvard student, was discovered killed in the park, and his girlfriend, Susan Petz, was reported missing. On July 20th, Porter's body was discovered, just 25 miles from the Domblewski murder location. Before long, several police helicopters arrived in Wells to assist. Powerful loudspeakers blasted Edith Garrow and her son Robert Jr.'s voices as they circled over the trees.
Honey, this is Edith. Won't you please come out? Leave the rifle in the woods.
We don't want you to get hurt.
While helicopters hovered above the area, Garrow persisted in his hike northward in the direction of Speculator. He still had his rifle. Throughout the following few days, locals saw Garrow multiple times, but he escaped by running into the woods. Only a few times, bloodhounds were able to track him. To mislead the dogs, Garrow walked in and out of streams. Garrow managed to survive his first week, mostly by breaking into hunting cabins. He'd take whatever food he could and rest. Then when he felt like he had to move, he'd steal clothes. Even with such a massive manhunt, Garrow managed to avoid detection. Following a few hopeful sightings, search groups noticed a pattern in Garrow's activity on August 5th. On August 6th, police had a confirmed sighting at a gas station in Speculator. On August 7th, officials learned that Garrow visited his sister in the town of Mineville. Her house was overrun and searched by dozens of officers. However, Garrow managed to slip away once more into the forest. His sister told police she had no idea where he went. However, she noticed that he had a cut and was bleeding on his right hand. The police increased the size of their squads by 2 and extended the operation very close to the Canadian border. The Adirondacks were paralyzed with fear throughout the manhunt because locals had no idea what to expect. It was almost as if there was a real live boogeyman hiding in the woods. Many bought guns to keep at home, and the level of paranoia increased. There was a massive influx of unfounded and unreliable sightings. On August 9th, as police were at the residence of Garrow's sister, a conservation officer noticed Garrow's nephew going into the woods behind the house. Amazingly, as a few officers went to investigate, Garrow suddenly appeared from the woods and started to run. Police shouted for him to stop, but Garrow, still armed with his rifle, kept running. The police opened fire in a hail of bullets, hitting him multiple times. He was shot in his left hand, back, and legs, and then he fell to the ground. Garrow even resisted police as they tried to handcuff him, but in a matter of seconds, Robert Garrow was apprehended. It was the longest manhunt in New York State history, spanning 12 days.